Hello. Welcome back to Coffee Chats.
We are live and in charge with us 2 for 1 in one day.
Yes, if you were here earlier, I was on that side of the screen, and now I'm on this side of the screen. We mixed it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so today, friends, is all about early praise. That is what we were talking about in this edition of Coffee Chats. For those who are currently on target to publish in May of 2022 with New Degree Press, you are now in the thick of learning about early praise, thinking about it, and starting to ask people about it. So we wanted to bring on a few author coaches with expertise in this area and ask them some questions. And as always, if you have any questions as we're talking to these author coaches / guests, ask them in the chat, and there will be a Q&A portion at the end of this coffee chat. So without further ado, hello, other author coaches.
Hello.
Would you guys like to introduce yourselves briefly?
Sure. So I'm Emily VanderBent. I am an author coach, and I am the author of a young adult historical fantasy series called the Crimson Time series.
And I was on mute. That's awkward. Anyway, I am SD Howard. I am the author of the Christian fantasy novel, The City of Snow and Stars. It tackles hard topics around abuse, human trafficking, and the question of why does God let bad things happen.
Excellent. Well, we're so excited to have you both. I mean, obviously, we love working with you. So we're really excited to talk about such a pertinent thing, pertinent to the process that the authors we're working with are going through right now, but also, again, pertinent to the author journey at large. But this is something that all authors have to do at some point, for better, for worse, for neutral, etc.
All of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. For all
in preparation for this talk, I was actually reading a book earlier today, and it only had one praise quote on it. And it just said, the front praise quote was a snippet from the same praise quote on the inside of the jacket, which I thought was hilarious. And the snippet was, "I loved this book." And that was it. And then the rest of the praise quote, the other sentence, was on the inside of the dust jacket. But it was just from one person, one quote, and that was it. And this is like, a traditionally published full on. And I was like, so it doesn't have to be fancy. Don't stress yourselves out too much is the lesson that I want to get from that. It wasn't from like the New York Times or anything. It was just from another author. I'm assuming it didn't say author of, etc. It just said person name. So it could have been their mom. Who knows? Like, don't let it stress you out is the lesson I want to glean from that one. So as we get into the questions that we have for you today, the first one is, how early in the writing and or marketing process should authors begin to think about early praise is one of the questions, but also then acting on it, actually asking people for it. I want you to answer both because I'm curious.
So I don't ever think it's too early to start thinking about early praise. I actually will keep like a running list as I think of people or stumble across people on social media. And I'll put their name down. And then if I have time, I'll put their contact info too. That just makes it easier later on when I actually go to do the outreach. But as far as like doing the outreach, I usually won't start that until I've at least got like one round of edits done, maybe two, depending on like how rough that first draft was.
Yeah, I would say that it's never really too early to begin thinking about who you want to reach out to. And that's really betas, that is influential authors, other indie authors, different social media influencers. Like, you want to start kind of getting the general idea And ideally, you should have at least a brief idea of who you're trying to reach, like audience-wise, because then you're going to look for those people. And as far as like actually acting on it, you need to have at least a solid draft that you're like, it's ugly, but it's not hideous, because people are willing to overlook some stuff when you're like, hey, it's not done yet. Right? Like, this is the draft, and I want to know if you enjoy the story, if you enjoy the characters, things of that nature. But yeah, you at least want to have a solid draft that you feel good about. Doesn't have to be pretty.
Right. I feel like intelligibility is the goal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does it speak into English? And if yay, you're good.
Yeah, you want them to be able to read it.
Yeah. I guess I would say too, it kind of depends on like who you're reaching out to. Like if it's a beta reader, like what Steven said, like they're not really going to care how rough of a draft it is. But if it's like J.K. Rowling or like someone famous, you want like as close to like the finished product as possible.
But at the same time, the thing that can be tough about that is if your finished product is really close to publishing, those people who are more famous want more time than you might be allotting them. So just keep that in mind. Don't let that keep you from doing it. Just bear it in mind.
Yeah. Well, and I think an important point to that, just real quick, is that with the time restraint, they're probably not going to read the whole book.
Yeah.
So like edit some of like the best chapters and then send them those chapters. Everything else could look like one of the, three ugly stepsisters from Cinderella, and no one else has to know, but you've put Cinderella up front first for those famous people.
Makes sense.
Yep. And it's a great segue. You're already talking about the next question in that, what kinds of people do you reach out to? You've listed a few. But, if you feel free to use this opportunity for storytelling, even who did you contact in your network, and who did you connect to outside of it, perhaps?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone.
Everyone?
It was, how many people do I have? Well, everybody that I knew would enjoy the book. That's the thing, is that if someone doesn't read my genre, there's no point really in reaching out to them and be like, hey, do you like this book? They're like, I read Amish romance. I don't read dark Christian fantasy. Like, what's wrong with you? That would just be awkward. And I'm probably not going to get something that's very nice. So you want to be very targeted with people. Like if it's your friends and family, like make sure that they actually read the genre. Because here's the thing, you don't want I loved this book, because no one cares about that when they actually look at it on the store shelf. Everybody says that. Your mom says that. You're like, oh, honey, that was so good. It's like, that's what you said about my 5th grade refrigerator art project. Like, I don't know if I feel that right now. So what you want to do is find people who are going to be like, man, the world building was on point. I loved the characters and how they all meshed together. Like, you want specifics. So try and find the people who are going to give you the specifics. And in terms of like indie authors, I reached out to several indie authors. I got a lot of no's, just due to time constraints. But the authors that I did get feedback from, and the ones that ended up as my editorial reviews that are still up on the Amazon sales page now, are the ones who gave me the specifics of world building, characters, elements of themes, those types of things. Those were the ones that really help, because that informs the reader. They like world building, they're going to love my book. They like big cast of characters, they're going to love my book. If it's just like, this book was so amazing, that tells them absolutely nothing about the book.
It's an opinion, not necessarily a fact.
Exactly.
I do have a quick follow-up to you on this one, in that, like, you addressed a couple good points. One, to inform the reader. My question would be, like, what's the purpose? Like, because you also said, saying a quote that just says, "I loved this book," which is a real quote that I said I just saw on the front of a real book. What's the purpose of being picky about the ones you choose to put on your book, and what's the purpose of having early praise on your book at all?
Yeah. So a lot of this will kind of depend a lot on other authors you ask. Like, there are some who are just like, stop putting praise quotes on books. That tells me nothing about the book. And I actually can appreciate that as a reader, because I'm like, okay, is the quote itself what sells me on a book? No, it's the blurb. If you do a good job with the blurb, that's what's going to sell people.
Yeah.
What the quotes can add to that is a level of credibility amongst your peers. And that's really what it boils down to. It's not a sales point. So a whole wall of early praise quotes from your peers may not sell a reader, especially in fantasy. I'm talking fantasy specifically, because everybody just wants to know, is there dragons? Is there magic? Is there swords? Is there angst and death? If not, the wall of, or if so, the wall of praise. And if it doesn't say anything about that, guess what's going back on the shelf?
Yeah.
So really, you want to be intentional about who is representing your book amongst your peers. Because if I have, again, someone who is like known for their Amish romance, and I'm writing gritty, dark Christian fantasy, everyone's gonna be like, I don't quite get that. How do those two connect? Because ideally, you want authors who look like you and who write like you, that you can then collaborate with and build relationship with, because then you can cross promote. But there's no cross promoting Amish romance in what I write by any stretch of the imagination.
You've made that very clear.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
that's why it's important to be intentional.
So what you're saying is,
You covered that
I couldn't resist doing this. So what you're saying is that you want for the right quotes to be associated with your book to gain credibility, so that your book can be in the rooms where things happen pertaining to your genre.
For
I'm
sure.
sorry, the Hamilton reference had to be made, but of course, yeah. But
yeah.
Everything you guys have said so far has been super insightful. So thank you.
Emily, I know you reached out to a few pretty interesting people. I'd love to hear about how that went.
Yeah. It's an interesting process trying to secure early reviews in general. Just like starting with like, who are you going to reach out to, but also like, where do I even find this contact information? I did a lot of Googling, a lot of like Facebook and Instagram, like just looking around and perusing, and you have to be a little bit creative. But yeah, so I guess talk about something a little bit different than like Stephen did, because he covered it really, really well. But as far as it goes with like noteworthy individuals or like celebrities that you're wanting to reach out to, how like Stephen kind of said, like it would be great if like Oprah or like Michael Jordan or Taylor Swift or like Leonardo DiCaprio or like someone like celebrity like that, like a household name, endorsed your book. You'd obviously like get a lot of visibility. Kind of try to go about it, and how I try to like coach other authors through is like try to define what famous is for you specifically, for like your book, for your brand, and like your genre. So like for me, I write historical fantasy. I haven't actually read a ton of historical fantasy. So I kind of tried to span the width of some fantasy authors and some historical fiction, and kind of go off in both sections, and then reach out to as many like historical fantasy specific authors I could as well. So like fantasy wise, I did a lot of the ones that I read and a lot of like the demographics that I know might be interested in my book. So I did like Adrienne Young, Cassandra Clare, Victoria Aveyard. And then for like historical fiction, I did like Karen Abbott and Pam Jenoff and like those types of people. But yeah, you just gotta figure out what that famous definition is for you, because A, they'll be a little bit more likely to respond if it's something that they're interested in. So be a little bit intentional about what that outreach looks like. And if you've bonus too, like if you've read their book and you enjoy them, like mention that in your outreach. Yeah, like obviously you're reaching out to these people to like get early praise for your own book, but you don't want to like launch into that immediately in that message. You want to do a little bit more of like introducing yourself, introducing your book, and personalize it a little bit more. Mention what books you liked from them, different elements of those books, and like if there's anything that like crosses over between your book and their book, mention that as well. And she also writes similar genres to me. So I reached out to her, and specifically I mentioned The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, because even though that is it's an amazing book, yes. But even though that is more like an adult, like historical fantasy, it's very different and very like genre blending. But we have that overlap of like strong female characters, of history and the significance of history, of like that fantastical element. So I made sure that I kind of incorporated a lot of those like keywords and those overlapping things into my outreach to her.
And it's important to also think about not only being intentional with your outreach, like you said, but being intentional about following up. Outreach, as hard as it is, it's not done there. You have to do more. Gosh dang it.
So, how'd you hold yourself accountable?
Oh, was there a question in there? Yeah. How did you? What did your habits look like in terms of following up? Kyra has a great rule of thumb in terms of like the, 72-hour rule?
Mm-hmm.
That might be a little less time than you might want for early praise. What are y'all's thoughts?
I think it depends on the person.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on who it is that you're reaching out to. Betas, when it comes to early praise, betas don't generally write books, they read them. And so if you're trying to get early praise from them, you might have to help them a little bit in figuring out like what it is that they're supposed to be doing and giving you. So ideally you want to ask them like 4 questions. Like, what did you like? What was confusing? What did you think about this concept? And how would you explain it to a friend? You know, just as a for instance. And it's tackling like the concepts of themes, characters, chapter elements. And then the last one's really about marketing. Like, how would you describe it to a friend is how you can try to describe it to other people. Same kind of goes along the lines with indie authors and influencers. It's like, hey, here are these key topics that, you know, I would really love your feedback on. But as far as, you know, like following up, like betas, you should have a deadline. And then if they're getting close to that deadline, like you should be messaging them fairly consistently, like be like, hey guys, you guys committed to this.
Yeah.
If it's a
can you do it
author,
or not?
Exactly. And if it's an indie author, essentially your follow-up should be determined by the expectations that you set at the front.
Yeah.
For everybody. Like if you're talking with an indie author and you're like, hey, I have to get these early praises back by X date, and that's 2 months out. You ask them, I need this back in 3 weeks. Is that reasonable? Especially if you're not doing a full book. If you're just sending them some key chapters, there should require less time. But you are following up dependent on the deadlines and the expectations that you have set. Now, if it's a famous person, have fun chasing them down. Like, I don't know, unless you happen to have their social media or their direct email address, that you can be pestering them every now and then. But really, I would say you're going to be easily looking at 3 to 6 months before you're getting a response from someone who's famous. They're busy. So, you know, that one is maybe check up at the 3-month point and be like, hey, how's things going? Remember that book I sent you? I still would like a praise quote for it.
Yeah.
I would say, like, it's okay too when you're reaching out to those famous people and like doing your follow-up, that if they like don't get back to you, or they get back to you like even after your book is published, you can still use that praise quote. You can throw it on like your editorial page on Amazon. You can like hop into Canva and create a graphic and whatnot and share that on social media. If you're doing like a special edition or like a hardcover or a paperback, something different from like what you just put out, you can always throw that on that too. But yeah, I mean, I guess to add something different too, as far as like, how did I hold myself accountable? If I don't stay organized, I go a little crazy. So anything I can do to like stay organized and know what's happening. So like that same like Excel sheet or whatever that I will like throw for like if I did the outreach, if they responded, what their response was, and like put like time markers too, so I know like how long it's been since I've heard back, and that's my follow-up.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I would say, especially if you're asking just a simple question, like if you're saying, is this of interest to you at all? Do you think this is even possible? I think it's okay to follow up within, you know, after 72 hours. Give them the opportunity to see the email and answer your very simple yes or no question. You know, it's not open-ended. It's not an essay. It doesn't require, like, they could even just send you, I would prefer an email with just the word no over no response. You know what I'm saying?
I concur.
So,
look at that segue.
Once you get them, what do you do with those early praise quotes? What can you do? How did you do it?
Emily, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so I kind of ran through this a little bit, but like I got some early praise quotes back after my paperback came out. So I threw them on my hardcover. I also like made graphics and I'll share them on social media like all throughout the process. And like it's nice for me too, because I'm writing a series, so a lot of the quotes and the things that people are talking about kind of build off of each other. So it's almost like good marketing for the book itself that I'm on, but it's good marketing for like the book coming up as well. But then I also like try to go into my Amazon page every so often and like swap those out with like fresher and newer reviews. Yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah, I did the initial ones for the paperback, and then between the paperback and the hardcover edition, I had gotten several more. Honestly, a lot of them I took from Goodreads. So I think that's something that people don't necessarily think about later on, is that like you can also use your Goodreads reviews as those editorial reviews or early praise for your book and slap them up on the Amazon page or the back cover. Now I did something different with my hardcover edition. I did a full wall of early praise, and that was for essentially from book blogs that I had review the book. That was from some readers. That was from several authors within kind of just the fantasy genre in general. And then for the illustrated edition, I just did the full blurb, and I just kind of left the editorial reviews to speak for themselves up on the Amazon sales page. And the same for putting it into Ingram Spark. So that way, everywhere Ingram Spark shows up or they distribute books such as Barnes & Noble, those editorial reviews would actually also show up on there as well. So aside from it being on the book or surrounding the book. I also did some of the social media posts. I'm not as good with the graphics design as Emily is, so mine weren't nearly as pretty. And honestly, most of the ones that I actually made didn't end up getting used. But yeah, those are some of the ways that you can use the early praise, is to really try and generate some excitement around the book.
So I do have a follow-up question for you both pertaining to, again, how did you use your early praise quotes once you gathered them? So, Stephen, you just mentioned how some of the quotes that you put on your hardcover were from like book bloggers and some Goodreads people. So book bloggers / book reviewers are a very interesting category of people. So I guess like in your early praise search, like in gathering marketing quotes prior to publication, did you reach out to book reviewers at all? Or would you say that book reviewers are better to approach upon the publication of a book?
So I didn't really do as much with the book reviewers pre-publishing, and that was mainly just due to time constraints. Many of them prefer to have a physical copy of the book, and I simply just didn't have those. And I focused on who my readers would be first during the pre-publication. So reaching out to those people. The one famous person I reached out to was Stephen, our law head. He doesn't do early praise, but I did get a response back from him, which was pretty cool. But yeah, so afterwards, particularly with the hardcover, because everybody loves hardcovers, I wanted to make sure that the hardcover had representation from book reviewers. I didn't pay for Kirkus. I didn't do any paid reviews outside of Reader's Favorite, and that's the sticker that you'll see on the front of the hardcover edition. Those were the only ones, and I only ended up using one of the quotes that I had paid for, because honestly, I had better quotes to use from the readers on Goodreads and the book bloggers. So in terms of when people are getting their advanced reader copies, that will kind of determine how soon you're able to actually reach out to those book reviewers. Because again, many of them, I would say the majority of the ones that I reached out to, prefer the physical copy. Not necessarily hardback, just a physical copy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was kind of in a similar boat to Stephen. The only other thing that kind of came to mind as he was talking is, after my paperback came out, I did like an Instagram blog tour, like book tour. And so I sent certain people like the actual physical copies. And even though it wasn't part of the tour, a lot of those people ended up reading. They were book reviewers. A lot of them ended up reading the book and then providing a review. So I used a lot of those on my hardcover when that came out.
There we go. I was like, is Kyra frozen? So
No,
maybe
here.
I'm frozen. I don't know. So
Dun-dun-dun-dun.
as we ask our last official question, I want to remind audience members that you can drop questions in the comments in the chat. And so as they're answering this one here, feel free to include those and we might bring yours on the screen. So you guys, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself if you went through the early praise gathering process again / like right now? And I know Emily had to do it like very recently, but if you had to do it again.
Yeah, again.
Yeah. I guess for me, just the whole like don't be afraid to make the ask in the first place kind of mantra. It can be like really disheartening to be really excited about reaching out to someone for a blurb, and then for whatever reason, maybe it's deadline or they have other commitments and like they're not able to do it. But like the answer is always no if you don't ask. So at least if you do make that ask, then you open yourself up to the possibility of a yes. And it might be a really awesome review that ends up gaining traction and everything like that. So, or like even open yourself up to like a possible collaboration or something with that person too. Like you don't know what that relationship could look like even just beyond that review. So just don't be afraid to ask.
No asky, no getty.
Exactly.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I would do right now is to be specific, ask questions that I need very specific answers to, and set deadlines, and not blast it out to everyone and their second mother's brothers, cousins twice removed, because honestly, it didn't help. People have the best of intentions, and they want to help you, and they have zero follow through most of the time.
Yeah.
And
they need some nudge.
Yeah, a little nudge, more like a but yeah, asking the questions of what did you think, and trying to keep it simple, what did you like here? What about that? Was there anything that was confusing, and how would you describe it to a friend? That gives you basically everything that you need to know, and it helps them kind of frame their thoughts as they're reading. And then you need those answers for some of those questions that you have. Because if you're like, yeah, this is for an early praise, but if I get this back and they're like, yeah, this part was super confusing, and you're like, oh, I thought I did a good job on that, I guess I'm going to have to go back and fix that. Then you have that versus it's out there in the world and everybody's leaving you 2-star reviews being like, this made no sense. And you're just like, dang it. So don't do that.
This is important. Like, because you don't want to just go out there and say, would you be willing to give me some early praise? Would you be willing to give me an endorsement? No, do not ask that question. Do not use those words. Okay. Do what Stephen just said. And would you please review a couple of those questions that you just said, that you said quickly, but a little bit slower.
Yeah. So, and we're actually going to be publishing a video on getting early praise, specifically from betas, here in the next couple of weeks on Manuscripts. And I break it down even further with the actual template. But basically it is, what did you like about the book? The themes, concepts, story arcs. Was there anything that was confusing to you? That's a key thing. That's not part of early praise as much as it is general feedback, which is helpful. Then what did you think about this particular concept in chapter 5? And again, it's not necessarily early praise, it's feedback for you. And then how would you describe it to a friend? And then they're going to give you that. So then you take that first one and that fourth question. And then if they're like, or if you're just looking at it and you're like, I don't know what this is, but I like it. The concept is there. Rephrase it and be like, is this what you're trying to say? And they'd be like, thank you. That's what, and this is particularly more with betas. Like, that's exactly, that's such big brain stuff right there. That's what it was. You're like, perfect. Can I use that as an early praise for my book? And they're like, sure. That's exactly what I was trying to say anyway. So you probably won't have to do that as much with authors and famous people, because they'll be just, the famous people will be like, it was a great read. So, but yeah,
I love this book.
Yeah, I love this book. So good. But those questions and then setting deadlines, that's what I would do if I have to go back through and do this for book 2. That's what I'm going to be trying to accomplish, is asking those questions and being specific.
Alrighty. Audience question time. Are you ready? Do you provide the entire manuscript or a few chapters to early praisers?
Depends on who you're reaching out to.
I knew you were going to say that. I was ready for it. Why
Famous
does
people?
it depend?
Time. Because if you're on a time restraint, like a very, very tight time restraint, somebody's not going to be able to read through the whole book unless they are going to binge it in 12 hours. Mm-hmm. And it's going to depend on the size of the book. I write epic fantasy, so I'm in the 80K to 100K range. Now, granted, I've had people binge my book in 3 hours, but that is not the norm.
That's a fast reader, by the
Yes.
way, to read
The
that
fastest-
many words in 3 hours.
Yeah, the fastest binge time is 97 minutes. I don't know how they did that, but they did.
Are you sure that they read it?
They did. They gave great details on it.
Wow.
But yeah, so like
Speed reader.
that's not the norm.
No,
So
absolutely
you
not.
could expect if you're giving somebody, let's say a beta reader, who is more likely to read the entire manuscript, and if it's my size book, you want to give them at least 3 to 4 weeks to try and get through that. If it is a indie author, then you can kind of negotiate with them of like, you know, what does your time frame look like? Like I can provide you, and this is like you provide them an either or. I can either send you, you know, the first 5 chapters that give you the general sense of my story, or I can send you the entire manuscript, which would be better for your schedule. Because A, it's showing that you're being considerate of them and not just being like, I love you so much, love me.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's a famous person, then it's like, would you be willing to read my introduction?
Yeah,
Does the concept
something.
sound good? Yeah, just like 2 chapters from my book that are like the best parts of my book. You'll have no context, but is that okay? So it really depends on who you're sending it to. And again, it depends on the time frame.
Mm-hmm.
The shorter that time frame, the less you want to send, but the more strategic you want to be in what you send them.
There's another strategy that I've seen people implement, which is, and I don't know at what point you would use this strategy. So that is my question. The strategy being, you reach out to someone and then you say, does this sound like something you would say? And you write the praise quote for them and give them the opportunity to edit as they so choose. But especially for people who are maybe having a hard time trying to find the words, as it were. Who might you use that strategy for? And at what point in your interaction with them would it be acceptable?
Betas.
Betas, for sure.
100% the betas. Because again, betas read books. They generally do not write books.
Yeah.
And so more often than not, the betas who typically make up your friends, your immediate friends group, they are going to be feeling some amount of pressure to give you something really, really nice. And while that is good, best of intention means that I feel all of this pressure. Therefore, if I just don't do it, then I don't disappoint them by disappointing them in a different way. You know, because I didn't give them a praise quote, but I didn't screw up the praise quote. So, you know, it kind of balances itself out. But if you're asking those questions,
you can't fail at what you don't try.
Exactly. So if you're sandwiching question 1 and question 4 with that little bit in the middle of you're just asking them for feedback, suddenly it's just feedback. It's just general, kind of generic, very broad, not necessarily pertaining to anything in particular. You're not even using the word early praise, endorsements, or whatever. It's like, hey, I would love to have your insights on this book because your insights matter to me. Here's 4 questions. Here's a timeline. Does that sound reasonable? Yes or no? For those who say no, be like, that's okay. Thank you so much. For those who say yes, they get it back to you. You're like, man, you cannot words. Let me help you with the words. And then you formulate what they said. Don't blow it out of proportion to make yourself feel better. Just look at what they said and short snippet, 2 sentences max. And be like, is that what you were saying? Like, I felt like that's what you were saying with this. And they're like, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of. But the words, they're hard.
Yeah.
Like, I know I wrote 80,000 of them. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
And that's what those
2 sentences was hard.
And that's what our editors do for us.
Bingo.
Alrighty. Well, with all of that, do you have any final words of wisdom for the audience? I mean, you've already said so many wise things. What is left?
Wise things.
I know. I'm like a sage like that. with the whole like no, I think just back to what I said, ask questions, be specific, set deadlines.
Yeah.
For all the early praise. That's what I would focus on.
Yeah. I would say like hold yourself accountable too, but like don't put so much pressure into it. Have fun and like be willing to like engage with these people.
Yeah. Get excited for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, the praise quote very rarely is going to sell the book to somebody. The inside of the book is what's going to do that, as will your blurb. So make sure that you're spending a lot of time perfecting your blurb, and the inside of your book, the early praise quotes are what gets people hyped up for it and what can add a credibility boost amongst your peers, but it's not necessary to sell to readers unless they are very specific.
Totally. Thank you both so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure interacting with you both as always.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Thank
It's
you.
been fun.
Yes. Bye, beautiful people. So yes,
right,
early praise. What a process. Truly.
What a
and
time.
Honestly, they're probably two of the best to talk to about those things. So I'm glad they're able to come on and share their wonderful insights.
Yes, if you do have any follow-up questions for our lovely panelists, their information is down below in the thing with the stuff. And if you're on Quip, you can reach out to them on Quip at any time as well. So if you also have an idea for another thing that you want us to talk about or learn more about, you are our inspiration for these videos. So feel free to suggest a topic or ask us an additional question. And that is all we have for you for Coffee Chat today. Kyra, any coffee chats to tease up next?
So we do have a lot of exciting coffee chats in store. One that will be coming up super soon will be how to get your books into bookstores. And then soon after that, we'll be talking about how to, different from editorial and or early praise reviews, how to leverage just getting reviews in general beyond publication. And so super, super exciting. And I'm, as always, important. Exactly. So
and helpful, hopefully.
Yeah. It's like being cognizant of the language that your book garners and gets from other people during the editing process, during the publishing process, and beyond is a critical aspect of being an author, because at the end of the day, you write your book to spark discourse and to be at the center of those conversations. So yeah, I'm super excited for those. And I'm grateful for you all and for Mackenzie, of course.
Oh. All right, guys. See you next time.
Bye, y'all.